Hi, thanks for watching. This is some highlights from our online sessions that I call the Inner Sanctum online sessions. And I edit out about 40 minutes from our teachers free for you to watch, because people that join our online sessions, it is a paid service. It is part of the way I make a living and help other teachers promote their work. So if you'd like to join the online Inner Sanctum group sessions, we have a guest teacher once a month, and I teach once or twice a month deliberate creation and energy exercises and how to tap into your intuition and how to be more psychic and all that good stuff. Please sign up on the website Swain/Inner Sanctum. So I hope you join us if you're somebody that wants to make a difference in this world and feel like you've got something to share and you'd like a little support team and meet other teachers and meet some of the guests I have on the show and hear wonderful stories and wonderful teachings. So enjoy the highlights. And I'll see you. Hello and welcome to the Inner Sanctum. Where are we? March somewhere. 9th of March in Australia, 8th of March in the US and Europe. And our guest teacher today is Peter Panagore. Welcome to the Inner Sanctum, our little tribe, Peter.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you for jumping in at the last minute. So I do these every second week, and I do one, and I usually have a guest teacher, but I had done one a couple of weeks ago, and then there was another weekend before we had our next guest teacher, and I thought, oh, throw in somebody else in that week. Probably want to hear from somebody else, not just me all the time. So here you are.
Well, I'm glad to be invited, and I love that this is a global group.
I know, right?
It's
Isn't
so
that cool?
Fabulous. Yeah, it's really great.
Maybe you can just do a small introduction just for people who are watching, because I'm going to upload some highlights to YouTube, and we can get to know you a little better. Maybe something that you didn't say last time on the show.
We had quite the conversation.
What did you miss? That was a
Right,
good one.
I'm not even sure. But I'll tell you a little bit about the story, even though I know that everybody here knows what it is. I'll give you a little background, and before I do, I'll make sure my phone is off. And so when I was 21 years old, I went ice climbing in Western Canada in the Rocky Mountains, and I made a mistake, and it slowed our climb down significantly, and I ended up with my climbing partner, Tim. We ended up with hypothermia, and we froze to death. I froze to death, he froze. I froze to death on the last pitch, the last rappel, just above the bottom, about 150 feet up, after a very long night and of survival. And I tell it like it was nothing, but really it was the most frightening experience of my life. Dying was not what I wanted to do, and it was traumatic. And so by the time death came for me, I was already resigned to the fact that I was going to die. And I became peaceful, and I allowed myself time to think. And then I just began to fall asleep. And this one time when I fell asleep, I collapsed and hit the rock, and I stood back up. And when I was standing there, there's a thing that happens to your eyes when you freeze to death. It creates this tunnel vision, and I got at the very end, I got this tunnel vision, this collapsing sort of fade to black, and I thought I was going to fall asleep, but I didn't fall asleep. I was still awake inside of my consciousness, but my eyes couldn't see anything, and I wondered what was going on, and I saw the great expanse of darkness expand in front of me, and far, far, far into the distance, this little pinprick of intelligent light came rushing toward me, filling my entire visual horizon and telling me that it was taking me telepathically, no language. Even the impression was, I'm taking you, and I was like, no, you're not. And I don't know what's going on. I was confused. I was still scared. And then I was taken, and I was immediately content. And I was carried by what I call my angel of death, and carried in this expansive and narrowing tunnel. And now I use only metaphor because there's no way to talk about a place of non-being where there are no thoughts and no words and no bodies and no lips to use language. So everything's metaphor. And it's full of paradox. There's lots of illumination and darkness at the same time. seeing in all directions at once. But anyway, so the angel carried me, and I ended up in what I call an illuminated greater darkness. And I was conscious and content, and I understood that this was me. We're not Peter. No more flesh. No. There was no thing there whatsoever. There was nothing. There was nothing there. It was nothing. No thingness. And I was no thing either. I was like I described myself as an orb of consciousness. It's 10,000 times bigger than my body, my physical body. And my seeing, my thinking, my understanding, all were one thing. They weren't separate things. And I had no brain in the way of my thoughts. And I thought to myself that I was returned to myself, that this is who I was always. And how did I forget when I was living as Peter, that this is who I am? And I saw this portal open up in front of me like a doorway, and gigantic, and it had another tunnel inside it, and the tunnel was as long and arcing as the infinity in which I was. And I was in the middle of like an infinite expanse that I could see in every direction at once, but there was nothing there but me. And I was completely content. I was unafraid and not lonesome. And this tunnel was this shimmering flow of transparent and translucent energy. And I touched it with my being, and it was all living life itself. And it flowed into me and infilled me. And I went into what I describe in my book as my own hell, suffering all of the pain that I gave to everyone in my entire life, intentionally and unintentionally, in a sequence, and discovered that the pain that I gave them was 10,000 times greater than I thought that I'd given them. Only it turned out I gave it to myself more than I gave it to them, and it juxtaposed to my giving it to them were all my rationalizations in sequence for having caused them such suffering. And those rationalizations were stupid. They were immaterial, not powerful, weak. And meanwhile, I had this third perspective that was being spoken into me, because meanwhile, I felt my soul self, my consciousness orb, completely enveloped in this infinity, surrounded by love. And the voice was speaking to me, saying, with no sound and no language, into me, saying, I love you, I made you, I created you, I know you, I've always known you, you are my beloved one. And I saw all these things at once. I saw my suffering, I felt this forgiveness, I saw the long tail of my created soul, I saw the origin of my being called into being. I felt and heard my name called, which wasn't Peter, which was the soul name that made me exist. And I could see the flash origin of my created self coming, emitting from the oneness of being as a separate component of the oneness of being. I was of the same substance of it, but it's also less than it, same and less than at the same time. And I could see the other lives that I had lived or were living simultaneously, because I was in a place of timelessness, and everything was happening all at once, and I was forgiven and beloved and infilled then with this oneness of being that was bliss and joy and adoration and love, peace and beauty and understanding and knowledge, and anything that I wanted to know, I was instantly downloaded into my orb of consciousness. And what I wanted to know was what the structure of the entire cosmos was, from the very smallest to the very largest. And I knew all of it. I understood all of it in an instant. And I understood everything about everything, basically. And I said to the voice, who I could not see, am I dead? And the voice said, yes. And I said, well, I can't go now. I've got parents who are suffering, and the loss of my sister had vanished and run away. My mother broke as a person for a long period of time, and I was swept in an instant and sort of brought back into this universe, but I was still outside of it, and I could see all of Earth all at once, as if it were a hologram, but also real. And I could see every single human being, and every human being of the 7 billion were beloved as I was, as beloved as I was. And it was as if I was the most special created being in all the universe, but it also was that everybody was the special, most created being in all of the universe, particularly loved. And everyone was covered by a veil of blindness. And the voice said to me, in the way that I love you now know that I've always loved you. Always, now, and in the future, you are my beloved. And the love was indescribable, a septillion times greater than anything, all the love that ever was shared on earth, all combined into one, a septillion times greater than that. And I knew that I was healed and whole and home and protected and beloved, and all was well, all will be well, and all is well, which I found out later Juliana Norwich wrote in her book from whatever century she was in, 14th century. And I said, yeah, but I haven't gone through the tunnel yet. And my parents are suffering. I could see their faces, and I could see their suffering, and it seemed like all of their suffering for the rest of their lives I could see in their faces. And the voice said, in the same way that you are healed and whole now, so will they be. And in the same knowledge that you now know that your time on this earth, on that earth, was the wink of an eye, that fast was because now you're in timelessness. And now I understand that even though their suffering will last the rest of their lives, that when they finally leave, it will be as if there was a wink of an eye, and all their suffering will be gone, and they'll be completely whole. And the voice kept saying to me, "Come home. It's time for you to come home." But I had a choice, and I chose. I said, "Well, can I go help them? Do I have to go home now? They need me. If I go back to my life, can I come back here?" The voice said, "Yes, if you go back, you can come back here." I said, "I choose to live my life." And the voice said, "No, you won't live your life," and sent me back. And I came back crushed, like 10,000 times bigger, smushed into this little tiny physical form that I'm in. And it was disorienting for a long period of time. In brief, the rope came free on the first pull. It was stuck up around the crag in the corner of the cliff, and it came free on the first pull, and we descended and we self-rescued. But I came back a completely different person. Same body. Everybody looked at me looking like I was the same guy, and I was not the same guy. I had the same characteristics, but I was an entirely different person from that moment on, and I'm still a different person than I was before. And now here I am. I came back for my parents' sake. My dad is now on his way out as we speak. And whether he'll be here for another year or two, we don't know. But he's in his second rehab and third hospitalization since July. And it's not looking good for him, except for he's going to go home. And I know he's going to. And my folks, when I came back, I kept it a secret for close to 20 years. About 3 years ago, I asked my parents what I was like when I came back home. And they said, "Well, you were compassionate." It's not that you were compassionate before, you were, but suddenly you were much kinder to everyone. And we noticed and we talked about it. We didn't understand what had changed about you, but we knew it had changed. And not only that, my dad I'd been planning to go into my dad's business. He's an architect. I was with my sister going to be the next generation in architecture. And I did not go to graduate school in architecture. I totally blew that off and went to divinity school to study mysticism, and which is totally impractical with an English degree, by the way, in terms of getting a job. Unless you go into ministry, and I got talked into going getting ordained in the United Church of Christ, which is like the United Church of Canada, which is like the United Church of Australia, kind of a liberal denomination, ordains women and gays, and socially progressive, but not mystical at all. And I was entirely mystical. I still am.
Oh, so beautiful. I've muted everybody. So just unmute yourself if you want to jump in and ask a question. And as normal, just jump on in, just interrupt me. Sometimes people put their hand up and I don't see them when I watch the videos back, and I totally go keep talking over you. But look, it never gets tired, Peter. That story is, I just think we need to listen. All of us need to listen to these stories over and over and over and over and over and over again.
I have tons more to say if you would want me to, or I can wait up.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
Vladdy and I were just talking, and a few of us were just talking before you came on about, what he wants to do with his life. His parents want him to get a real job, go to school, earn money, as all parents do. And he knows that he's here as a difference maker. He's here to share the love, a bit like you did when you came back. I think it's different today. You don't have to become an ordained minister. You can share the love, and I know so many people that are doing it, especially the young people. They're doing it through music, they're doing it through meditation, they're doing it through just gatherings. They're having gatherings, they're drinking ayahuasca, they're having cacao ceremonies, they're dancing, there's just so many ways that people are just coming together to remember the love that they are, and to celebrate that love and just live that love in a more powerful way on earth. And it's all a part of the shift. Your story is so similar in that you went to that place that Michael Tamura did, who was the last person I had on the show, who had five NDEs, and in two of them he was in that place of that place that you speak about. As the two of you speak about it, it's that place which not everyone talks about when they have NDEs. They see, they go to a part of non-physical world where grandma is, or parents or relatives are, and they hang out with relatives. But that's not where you went. You went back to the origin of the soul, the origin of
the... I always have questions.
Good. Good.
The experience you had, it's so huge. It's not possible to come and remember everything.
Right.
How has it developed throughout the years afterwards?
Good question. Very good question. I brought back with me maybe 90, maybe 1% of 100%. I'll give you an example. So about a year ago, I was in a yoga class, and during the Shavasana, I tend to not go into Shavasana. I tend to kneel and go into meditation. And so I went, I popped up and I got in my kneeling position, and I went inside my meditation. And as I was in my meditation, I left myself pop, and I was back in the space of the same heaven that I had been in when I died. And that's when I remembered seeing like I was a singular photon of light, and the divine unity was this mass of all of these photons, bazillions of photons, creating this one light, and I was the same as and separate from. And I saw that when I was dead, but I didn't bring that knowledge back with me. I didn't remember that knowledge until about 2 years ago. And so it keeps, over all these decades, it keeps unfolding, and I keep remembering more. And I think that part of that is a result of a constant life of meditation, continually trying to peel back the layers of my ego in order to create a larger space for the flow to come into me, and also to turn my inner eye back to the divine in order to look more at what is looking at me. Because I live in this state where the divine is always looking at me. It never shuts off. It's always open, and I want to be able to turn my eye to look back. And so yeah, it keeps unfolding, and I keep learning more things. And one thing that I can't see that I did see when I was dead was what these simultaneous or in sequence other lives are. And I say that I don't know whether they're simultaneous or in sequence, because I was in timelessness, and I could yet see these divisions or sections, slivers, in this long tail of my soul that I couldn't see where they went, but I could see that they were other, like, micron thin layers of person, like Peter Peter was like this sheathing that I had come out of, and it was real, but it wasn't me. Does that sort of get you in that direction, Sissel? Or
Yes. And you mentioned the ego. Have your ego dissolved as it was before? Has it changed?
It's changed.
It's not in the power of your thoughts anymore. It's more working with you, not against you.
It's less present.
Yeah.
I mean, I still have enough ego that I function in the world. You know, I can't function in the world without your ego. It's a necessary thing, and so I have. It's not like it's a. How do I describe this? It's sort of. It helps me. It's dissolved enough that I can see the light inside other people, and that eliminates a barrier between us. And so I even though I see that they're, human beings come in all these shapes, sizes, colors, and gender derivations, all of those things are less the real person than the light that emanates from inside them. And the light is more, the more the ego dissolves, the more the light becomes visible, is the way that I experience it. And so I can't help but make my choices in my daily life out of this divine connection. And so my ego plays a role because I live here and I still have a body, but all of the choices and sequence in my life are based in my connection to the divine. I use examples like this. I went into ministry, right? Because it was a practical way for me to earn a living and continue my pursuit. Nobody was going to question the minister who spent hours every day in meditation or in yoga, because I've been a yogi too. And no one's going to question the minister who's reading all these ancient books on mysticism. And so I used that as kind of a way to pursue my intellectual and spiritual development secretly. And I also did a lot of social service work as a result. And so some of the choices I made, so for instance, one day I got a phone call from the police department, and the lieutenant, who I knew because I live in a small town, said, we have a gun situation and he's holed up in the bathroom and his wife and his kid are in the apartment, his baby, and he's only going to talk to you. Will you put on body armor and will you go into this situation with us? I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So I got on body armor and we go into this guy's apartment, and I got these two cops with guns over my shoulders, one on this side and one on that side. They're all in body armor. And I talked to this guy for, 45 minutes until he gives up. And why did I do that? Because if he killed me, I was going home. And so I also wasn't afraid. So it continues to influence my life in terms of individual choices that I make, even right down practical things like money, earning a living or doing something that's fun versus something that's practical. I'd rather have fun, because it's a time limited situation. I'm in here, and I want to enjoy myself as much as I can while I'm here, because I don't see any other reason to, let me add some light here. I don't see any other reason to not have fun.
I'm very curious when you talked about all your lives that you were kind of seeing some place passing by. Was it a kind of a recognition of this is me?
It was more of a recognition that they aren't me, that they were lives that I was living, but the recognition of the me was the soul itself. The soul is the me, and all these other things are like, it's like my body is me and my fingers are an extension of me, but just this much of me. The rest of me is the real me. This is just this little tiny part of me. And it was like only, slivers. They were like slivers, and I was this everlasting, humongous, long tail. When I say long tail, I mean like eons long, like eons of age, and width was huge. And that's who I am. And all these other lives that I lived or are and living simultaneously, and like I said, can't really tell because it was timeless. They were just like manifestations, but not me at all. They were just little bits of me. I didn't consider, I didn't come back seeing what those lives were. Now, did I see them when I was dead? Maybe, but I can't see that now. I can only see that they were. When I say that they might have been simultaneously happening, what I mean is that they weren't in sequence. So when I was in the place of timelessness, that means that all time was crushed into one moment, or all moments were elongated into one unit. There was no past and there was no future. There was only this eternal nowness. And so all these lives that I was living, they were all happening at the same time. So it seemed to me. And I know that people talk about coming to Earth and living a life is where you learn what you need to know to progress. And I think that that's true. But for me, my experience was not that. I knew everything I wanted to know when I was dead. Like here, I'm ignorant. And I had no ignorance. I had only knowledge. And so it seems to me I will return to the state of understanding and knowledge when I'm dead, not when I'm here. And that my experiences here aren't so much learning for me as they are an ignorance to me. Cecil?
It was just what you said. Is it possible that all the lives you have in that moment have given you all the knowing that you was having?
All the knowing that it came to me came from the oneness of being. This experience of the infilling. So I was infilled. I was this like orb of consciousness, and I was infilled with all these things that we break apart in this world as separate. Like we have moments of joy and moments of adoration, moments of beauty, moments of love. All these things, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, they were all oneness, and they were injected into me. Like I was. Like if one more drop of this had been injected into me from the holiness, from the divine, I would have been obliterated. I would have been a non-being. I would have folded right back into the oneness and in totality. So which I understand what you're saying, but all of this, in my experience, and I can't speak for anybody else, arose from the indwelling of the oneness of being inside of me. It wasn't like. That's what showed me these lives. It's what gave me the vision to see it, it gave me the vision to see it. And so, but that's not to say that what you're saying is not true. I just don't know. It's outside of my experience, and it seems to me that. Okay, so it seems to me that maybe my soul's been around for a long, long, long time, and that maybe I've already gone through this whole up and down learning thing, or maybe it's that everybody's exactly like I am, which I think is absolutely true. And I don't think that that's just for human beings. I think it's for the entire universe. Is that we're all exactly made out of the oneness of being itself, and that our pursuit is to go back into the unity, and that. Maybe some souls are further along and others aren't, but that also was a falseness that I saw, because either you're in the oneness of being or you're separate. And so either you're totally one and whole or you're less than. So every saint, every holy person, every awful person that can't see the light whatsoever, we're all on the same level. There's no above or below. There's only oneness of being and wholeness or separateness. And from where I was looking down at all of humanity and all existence, including myself, I was less than the holiness. And yet I was completely part of it. And I'm not sure I'm making sense to you. I struggle my entire life to try to articulate this stuff.
It. You know, what's coming to me, and she's been coming to me, she's here, because I said, give me this quote. So Mother Teresa's quote. So I'm asking as I'm listening to your, you know, how do we bring this huge experience into our daily lives? That's the question I held as I'm listening to you. And what came was Mother Teresa, and she said, it's not the great things that we do in life. It's the little things we do with great love.
It's exactly true. It's exactly true.
You know, Vladdy was asking before, what can I do? And with my life, and it's like, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter as long as you do it with that greatness of love that you're talking about. Like, how do we bring this experience, your experience, into our daily life? And that
you love each other. You love each other. You just love each other where you are. It's like the old lotus on the rocky mountainside cliff Buddhist kind of Taoist story. I don't even know where the story comes from, but there's the lotus blooms in the worst place. You bloom where you are. You live your life where you are, and you love as you go. And so you can be the CEO of a major corporation, or you can be working in the mailroom, or you can be homeless, or you can be, it doesn't really matter where you are. It's really about the little choices that you make on a daily basis, a moment to moment. And it's starting to get really dark where I live, so I'm going to turn on a few lights, and I'll be right back.
So, well, we're going to go
about 500 years ago, when the age of reason took over the world, it forced religion, Western culture, particularly Western Christianity, into two camps. Basically, it forced one camp into the literalist camp, and then they forced the other camp, the mainline denominations, into the rationalist camp. And both of them cast out mysticism. And Richard Rohr and even the Pentecostals, I tossed them in there, a little bit in their Eastern Orthodoxy. They've got a higher mysticism ratio. They're still dogmatic and doctrinal, and so is the Catholic Church. But even within the Catholic Church, within the monastic tradition, there's a lot of contemplation and mysticism. And so in the history of Western culture, Western religion, there's a whole lot of mystics who wrote books. Hundreds and hundreds of them, and they're not popular because people don't know they exist. People like Richard St. Victor, Jacob Boehm, Meister Eckhart, Julian of Norwich, Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa of Avila. There's a whole lot of them, and all of them wrote in the context of Christianity, or the ones I just mentioned. But all of them were actually just utilizing the language of the culture and religion in order to explain their mystical experience, because a mystical experience of union is very similar to a divine experience of death. I consider near-death experience to be on the scale of mystical experience. And that a mystical experience, Richard Rohr's talking about mysticism. Probably the most common mystical experience I think there is when someone dies that you love, and they come back to you and communicate to you telepathically, non-linguistically, I love you, I'm well, I forgive you, whatever the message is. You shift from believing in the afterlife to knowing that one person is alive. You may not know anything about religion, but you know that one thing in your soul with noetic understanding that your loved one is waiting for you. And so I think that religion always begins with a mystical experience in the West, Abraham and Moses and Jesus, and then religion gets built around this thing, and the divine connection of experience gets totally lost. And yet, every single person has it in them. And so if you pursue the interiorly, you find this light, you find this opening. And so there's a movement. Richard Rohr's a big part of it. There are other people who are participating too. I'm participating in that. I still work in the church, sort of. I'm kind of a bad boy. I'm in trouble with my denomination. I'm on a leave of absence from my ordination, not my ordination, but my standing. I think that Religion's afraid of mysticism because mysticism does not follow the rules.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And you lose, and when you're not following the rules, they lose power.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Thank you.
Mysticism rocks. Time to
Mysticism rocks.
rocks. Kristen, how do you do that?
The mystics.
The mystics. I'll have you like this, mystics.
Are you mystical? I'm mystical.
Well, she's dying over here. Somebody get CPR.
She's crying. She's laughing. She's all of it. So
Does that help?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, you're on the same page.
And mysticism, so mysticism, you can have a divine experience. A mystical experience has four components, according to William James, varieties of religious experience. It's transient. It happens to you. It's it's transient. It has a beginning and an end.
okay.
It's passive. It happens to you. You don't make it happen. It's noetic. It leaves knowledge inside your soul that's unspeakable. It's ineffable. So those four components: transient, passive, noetic, and ineffable. And that's what I was talking about with when a dead person comes and visits you who loves you and telecommunicates. Because if you try to say that to somebody, it loses all of its power and strength. It never captures what you know to be true. You can't. I saw my grandmother came to me in a dream and said she's okay. But what you experience is the love of your grandmother living in your heart, and recognition of your grandmother's immortality. I mean, how do you communicate that? You can't. That is also true of all other mystical experiences, and those other mystical experiences can happen to you. And one of the ways why God picks certain people for those, I don't really know, but I do know that through meditation and contemplation and a life of intentional connection to the divine, kind of softens the barrier, kind of makes it more permeable, more likely that you're going to have such an experience. And then you don't have to die for that.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you're wise to think that near-death experience is a terrible experience.
Oh no, for sure. And to touch on something else you just said, you know, one thing that religion, or at least the one I was raised in, that I think is unfortunate, is that it actually tries to cut off the connection to the divine directly. It drives me absolutely insane. Like yeah. That I have to go through another source to get there.
Well,
and
that's
really,
how
I don't
you
need
don't.
another source.
Nope, you don't. That's what the Quakers were all about in the United States. That's why they were in so much trouble with all the other denominations, and you know, when the U.S. was founded after we took it from the people who were here first. And so the Quakers said, you know, George Fox, it's right inside you. They're like, he's a bad guy. George Fox is going to ruin everything. Yeah, everybody's built in. It's right inside us.
Yeah.
It's inside everybody. It's inside the chickadees, inside the wolves. It's
yeah.
everywhere all the time.
Yeah. You know, this word mystical.
It rocks. I'm sorry, Cara. Go back.
It doesn't rock. I actually think that these experiences have to be taken out of the mystical closet and put
Well, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and put into the normal closet. Like,
yes.
I put a lot of people on the show that talk about ETs, and they have their connection to their galactic family. And these ETs live in a more evolved consciousness where life after death is so normal to them that they're communicating with spirits before they've actually incarnated into a body and having conversations with them. Like, you know, like they understand this dimensional thing, and it's such a normal conversation. It's just the eternalness of our being, the fact that we are not these bodies, where, you know, all this stuff that we speak about is their normal. And I think that we have to evolve into take it out of the mystical, take it out of the woo-woo, and make it the normal. Make it the normal. Look,
I would argue that the word is mystical.
Are you going to try and make me fit in again? Because I'm
trying to make you normal. I can never make you normal. But we are the way showers. So the people that call us crazy, when we're dead and gone, will be seen as it'll be normal one day. And so what's crazy today is normal. Look, when I started studying naturopathy, I'm old, so I'm like in my early 20s, that was considered totally woo-woo. Like totally not mystical, but like, you crazy, naturopathy, what's that crap? And now it's mainstream, only a good 30 odd years later, it's a mainstream thing. So it only took 30 years, but yeah, so now I'm talking about life after death and all sorts of things. I'm not talking about vitamins or diets. Oh, although I can go there if you want me to, but it's yeah, it'll be completely, in 30 years it will be normal. It'll be completely
I think that's what Richard Rohr is in pursuit of, and that's so. Let me give you an example. I spoke at Episcopal Church last weekend in Ipswich, Massachusetts, which is right next to Salem, witches and all that. And so I did a survey, as I do before I preach in every church I preach in. I asked how many people have had a mystical experience. It's like nobody. And then I started asking them questions. Who here has seen a dead person? The one like I described a minute ago. And then people raise their hands and they say, me, half the congregation. And I say, so who here has ever told anyone about that? They all said, well, I've told somebody. And then I say, who here has ever talked about it in church? Nobody. And so my effort here is to bring mysticism back into religion. And because the one place where you should be able to talk about the woo-woo, it as if it were normal, because it is normal, is in a sanctuary of a holy organization, whether it's a synagogue or temple or whatever it is, a church. And so what I'm trying to do is reclaim the classical meaning of the mystic away from the woo-woo mistake. Because until 500 years ago, mysticism was a bona fide thing. It was for real, and people wrote major books about it, and then it became woo-woo because it didn't fit into science. And so I'm arguing to reclaim the word back to its original meaning.
Yeah, and now it does, and now science explains it. It talks about quantum.
It's getting there. It's totally getting there.
Non-local,
Yep.
effect and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because when you have the higher up you go in the mystical experiences, the one I described with a dead person, that's a kind of a common. That's like transcultural and trans-religious and global. Lots of people have that. But there are other kinds of mystical experiences where you either have an indwelling of the divine, or you leave your body and have a vision in a heaven. The higher up you go, the further you go in these divine experiences, the more difficult they are to talk about, because there's no real language that can contain them. And the higher up you go, the more they keep giving. In the same way that near-death experience keeps giving, so do these higher experiences of a union keep giving, because it's not so much a new knowledge that we gain as it is a remembrance of what we already know. And so as in a mystical experience, there's this mark that gets left on our souls, this memory, this opening, and that opening stays there, and that mark stays there. The memory, the more you look at it, I tell people, if you want a deeper prayer life and you've had a mystical experience, stare at that experience. Don't try to understand it. Don't give it language. Just look at the noetic understanding you have in your soul. Stare at that. I do that all the time. I look at the experience not so much to try to contain it as I do to try to enter into it, and to dive into it.
Afterwards.
As it does. And I had a very similar experience when I was dead, in that when I went through all the suffering that I gave away, it was more like a cleansing. And there's a woman named Catherine of Genoa, 1500s. She calls it the divine fire of purgative love. It was like I had a purgation, and the divine fire of love cleansed me, that allowed me to have the space. I didn't have to carry that crap with me anymore. It allowed me the space to be indwelt with the love. And as long as I had this crap in the way, there was no room for it. But once it was burned away from me and cleansed from me, I was expansive and able to be indwelt in. I recognize that that when I have a choice between these two things, to choose love, and that's probably the biggest after effect that I have, which is very similar to yours, is that there's always this contrast. Is it the loving thing to do? And it's not always a simple answer, because sometimes love is complex. To be a loving thing for one person is to be a hurtful thing for another. And so then you have to kind of balance these two things out. But generally is it hate versus love? Is it bad versus love? Is it wounding another person versus love? Yeah, well, I think it is the time to open up about it and talk about it now. And I think the reason is that near-death experience is taking the lid off all this. Because science is driving spirituality globally. I keep saying that over and over again, because in the United States, they estimate 20 million near-death experiencers.
Wow.
And, multiply that number globally, and we're all talking about it for the first time. And this is going to allow all the other mystical experiencers to begin to talk about their experience, because it's going to be popular.
It is popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just noticed, like uploading YouTubes, every time I put near-death experience in a title, it gets 3, 4, 5 times more views than any other thing I upload. Yeah, it's popular. Yeah, people are searching, people are looking. Yeah,
and there's a lot of voices out there, and that's, I think, it's not one person speaking it; it's lots of people. It's going to be millions of people speaking out.
Yeah,
and that's so. For centuries, since Paul of Tarsus in the Bible was walking around talking about the end times. We've been believing that we're in the end times, and now people are believing we're in the end times. I don't think it's ever the end of the world, because the universe is 13 billion years old, and we're just a speck. I mean, the Earth could get hit by an asteroid, and maybe it's the end of humanity, but it's not going to be the end of the world. But I think for the first time in the history of the world, we have an opportunity now to actually have a revolution of love, because there's so many people being brought back from the dead. Yeah. And if there's 10 million of us in the United States, how many more mystics are there who've seen dead loved ones, or met an angel, or had an experience of Christ, or some other divine experience of holiness that entered into their life, and they're not talking about it because they're afraid to talk about it? Let's not make it fearful.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the more people that talk about it, the more that you give other people permission to talk about it. Big love to you all.
Thank you, Clement.
See you soon.